Not far from the shores of Lake Geneva in Switzerland is a large secluded villa, number 136 Route de Chêne. It's the headquarters of Mr. H. William Bernhardt. He's an American public relations executive, and in the last 18 months he's been directing one of the most brilliant and one of the most controversial publicity campaigns ever undertaken. From here, under the name of Mark Press, a small team of advertising men and freelance journalists have waged a war of words. And with their help, Mr. Bernhardt has been skillfully selling to the rest of the world the case for Biafra.
Come on, no! Come on!
It's now 2 years since the eastern region of Nigeria broke away from the Federation and proclaimed itself a republic. At the time, few people outside Africa had even heard of the word Biafra. According to a public opinion poll in West Germany, 8 out of 10 people asked thought it was a new kind of toothpaste. But within a year, Biafra had come to rival Vietnam as a major political issue. In November 1967, 2 Biafran ministers in Lisbon flew here to Geneva in quiet, discreet, neutral Switzerland. They'd been tipped off about Mr. William Bernhardt by one of his advertising clients. They were told that for 17 years he'd been operating in Switzerland, promoting anything from cosmetics to private aircraft, and that he had a reputation in the business of being an ideas man with a flair for the unusual. One of his stunts, for instance, had been to parachute a Father Christmas onto a hotel ice rink. He's not perhaps the sort of man you'd expect to be running a PR campaign for a war.
Well, I'm calling particularly regarding the statement you made in the article, which is covered in the last paragraph, where you allege that our company receives 30 million Swiss francs from the Biafran government.
His manners disarmingly diffident, and his accent vaguely reminiscent of somewhere in the mid-Atlantic. In the business, he's known as a charming lone wolf operator with a keen eye for the unusual. And with the Biafran account, he's certainly found that. Mr. Bernhardt worked out a publicity strategy, and on February the 6th last year, submitted this document to the Biafrans. He called his plan Fight for Survival and recommended 3 main categories of information he'd need. The name they chose was Mark Press News Feature Service. In a matter of weeks, transmitting information from Biafra to the desks of every news editor in Western Europe had become a highly efficient process. The Biafrans advanced $20,000 to get it going, and soon daily war communiques were being dispatched to 5 major news agencies, and handouts and background information were rolling off the presses at up to 7,000 copies an hour. Mr. Bernhardt had drawn up a mailing list of 3,000 people who received his handouts every day. They included every major newspaper and every British member of Parliament. This news network was manned by a staff of 25 who often worked overtime and at weekends. It was run by 3 specially hired executives, a journalist and 2 advertising men, who knew what they wanted and knew how to get it. But they're surprisingly secretive about the methods they used. What sort of things did you ask them to give you, and how did it get to you?
I'm not sure that's public information, I don't think. I think the obvious ones, it's a war, it's the most marketable thing you can have in public relations or communications, marketing communications, and obviously war news of every sort and type from every war front, firstly. Secondly, local news that built in some degree of normalcy in the country. You know, it was a country at war, and you had to sort of show that it was still carrying on as normal, you know, in spite of being attacked. And then I think there were 1 or 2 other areas which I don't think I should comment on.
But this was... why not?
Well, I think for the simple reason that it's not my business to, you know, to in fact explain to everybody else, you know, just the things I asked for. I don't think so.
At first, the newspapers were not as receptive as Mark Press had hoped. The telex reports from Biafra were often exaggerated, and peppered with inflammatory language. Meanwhile, Mr. Bernhardt exploited other publicity tactics. If the newspapers wouldn't believe him, then they could send their own reporters who'd see for themselves.
Biafra Radio Newspaper. Biafra Radio Newspaper.
By April the 21st last year, Biafra had started to hit the headlines regularly. Mr. Bernhardt reprinted a selection of articles by journalists he'd sent to Biafra and called the brochure The Week of the 21st. It was designed to impress the Biafrans with the work Mark Press was doing.
Nightmare in Biafra, Sunday Times. Federal bombers kill hundreds in Biafra, Daily Telegraph. Biafra confident in face of heavy odds, The Times. The impossible victory, Daily Express.
As the campaign gathered momentum, volunteers and staff assembled in Mark Press's conference room to sift the cuttings and assess the impact of their publicity. The main aim of Mr. Bernhardt's strategy was to get as many countries as possible to recognize Biafra and to stop foreign arms shipments to his client's Nigerian enemies. On April the 13th, Tanzania became the first to recognize Biafra, and in May, Gabon, Ivory Coast and Zambia followed. Czechoslovakia, Holland, Belgium and France all banned arms shipments. Those who worked with Mr. Bernhardt then told me that these weeks were the best they had. The campaign so far had emphasized Biafra as a nation with unpublicized grievances, outgunned and misunderstood. But now the tactics changed. Last June, a new word crept into the headlines: genocide. Relief workers reported an imminent danger that millions of Biafrans, many of them children, would soon die from starvation and protein deficiencies. The figures varied widely. The Red Cross estimated that 1,000 were dying every day. Caritas, the Catholic relief agency, put the figure at 10,000 a day. But no one will ever know the full facts because an accurate census was impossible. The Biafran leaders were reluctant to advertise their predicament. In fact, they were determined to present as bold a front as possible. But events took over. Seen from Geneva, the propaganda priorities had changed. The charge of genocide, that the Biafrans were being deliberately wiped out, became the new theme of the campaign. Last summer, the British government's policy of continuing to supply arms to the Nigerian federal government was attacked in demonstrations in Britain and abroad. In London, Biafran supporters clashed with the police in Trafalgar Square and Whitehall. Britain was branded with being an accomplice in genocide. At Basel in Switzerland, a British trade week was cancelled, and later in Bonn, Mr. Wilson, on an official visit, was mobbed by protesting students. The Biafran lobby in London was able to secure an emergency debate in both Houses of Parliament. It ended in uproar. Mark Press reprinted the whole of the Nigerian debate in a booklet with added comments in the margin. Comments which drew parallels with Hitler, Himmler and Stalin.
Mr. Bernhardt wrote those himself.
You saw him write them?
No, he got Hansard and read it through. I read a copy myself, but the copy that you're referring to of 27th of August last year was written by Mr. Bernhardt and not by myself.
Now, you reprinted the text of that Commons debate with comments added later. Whose comments were they? Were they yours?
They're obviously the comments of the Biafran government.
But who wrote the comments?
Well, I actually, I can't really mention who wrote it without asking permission of the person who wrote it, but it was approved by the comments had the approval of the Biafran government.
Did you write the comments yourself?
No.
Did any member of your staff here?
No, well, I suppose in the sense that we've helped to phrase it.
The federal Nigerians have been claiming that the Biafrans haven't been paying you recently. Is that true?
We are paid from time to time, but not always with the regularity that we would like, or which is in fact necessary.
Are they a long way behind with their payments?
Well, it varies. Here again, I don't think that my client would like me to discuss that.
Now, Mr. Bernhardt has been accused of having made himself into a millionaire by selling the Biafra War. It's an easy charge from the enemies of Biafra, but it's obviously unreasonable and unlikely. When he took on the campaign, he couldn't have guessed what it would have grown into. By the beginning of this year, the publicity campaign had taken yet another turn: civilian bombing. But in Geneva, where most of the original Mark Press team have left, Mr. Bernhardt carries on alone. He says he was Biafranized when he took on the contract and now has no intention of giving it up. In spite of everything he's done, journalists find it just as difficult as ever to check the facts on either side.
This must be the first war, civil or otherwise, that's been waged by a public relations firm, and waged with consummate artistry and great professionalism.
Well, I'm not politically committed at all. I have a communications job to send out accurate information about the facts that pertain, and use our professional skill and the facilities and the communications network of Mark Press to achieve that. It's an administrative job.